This was day 3 of our 5-day journey, and if all went to plan, we would end the day at the valleys of Thorsmork. After a quick bite to eat, sheltered from the wind behind a rocky outcrop, we continued our way along the cliffs that hugged the Markarfjordur River as it coursed its way southwards. I was inspired to undertake this challenge and travel to Iceland with the hope of further appreciating the world and the themes that Hideo Kojima and his team had presented with Death Stranding. Firstly, how the game mechanics translated into physically traversing such a landscape. And while I wasn't transporting vital provisions to a fractured and scattered nation, I was carrying all of my own provisions and everything I needed to survive the long trek across the remote and beautiful terrain of the Icelandic highlands. And secondly, what would it be like to witness the awesome vistas that played such a heavy role in inspiring Kojima when creating Death Stranding, all while reconnecting with and sharing in the experience with old friends. Before long, we had emerged from between the clustered hills in the Emstrua region and were able to see far to the south and west, with the river stretched to the horizon, along the way claiming its countless streams and tributaries to form a meandering and ever-changing path that would continue for another 30 miles before reaching the Atlantic Ocean. The mountain of Einhjörningur, with its distinctive jagged shape, would be the most consistent and striking feature in the landscape for most of the day. As we encircled its eastern face, clouds occasionally crowned and obscured its peaks. It wasn't until I returned home from the trip that I learned that Einhjörningur actually means unicorn in Icelandic. I personally saw it as more of a rhino, but I'll let you be the judge. After a couple of hours spent navigating up and down the small mossy hills that accompanied the river, we stopped for lunch atop a re-entrant that had unbroken views across the broad river plain that fell away below and to the foothills of the Tindjátlajökull glacier on the other side. After checking our food provisions, we realised we had overestimated how much we would need, which is always a good idea, but figured we could afford to double up on our lunch. I perched myself on a small ledge to eat, while peering off down the valley and surveying the mountains to the south that formed an unbroken line against the horizon, at the base of which we had planned to camp by the day's end. But after a double helping of instant noodles, and with heavy eyes, we decided to rest a while longer in a small grassy depression on the side of the cliff and take a short nap. The days were long this time of year, and we were in no rush. Feeling refreshed from our midday nap, we continued on, and as we parted ways with the river, we turned back to appreciate the distances we had covered that day and take one last look at Einhjörningur as we edged closer to Thorsmork. The mossy ground was gradually turning to blankets of grass, and the landscape for a time would start to resemble something more familiar and less alien. A cold breeze swept over the hill from the south as we tracked our way down the stony path, the river far below looking deceptively still, just a tangle of frozen silver lines drawn across the horizon. But as we got further down, the river became more and more audible. We eventually reached the Throngar River as it spurred on to join its larger brother and continue southward. And, as with the previous day, this river would prove to be too precarious to attempt to film while crossing with my camera in hand, or to set the camera up on one bank, wading back and forth. This was definitely the right choice, however.
I'm gonna go. Come closer then.
No, it doesn't matter if you go in. I'm filming it, so no pressure. Oh, that was alright.
how fast moving that is.
Yeah, I'm going to go down to that bit there and go to the middle and go across.
That might be the better idea, yeah.
After that close call, where I nearly went in for a dip, we found ourselves on the edge of Thorsmore, making our way along its crisscrossing pathways, where the land had sprung to life with ferns, birch, and juniper. We were nearly there, and with only a few more miles to go, we were eager to get our packs off and set up camp for the night. And as we passed up and down the undulating hills, we would occasionally find ourselves above the trees with wide views of the surrounding scenery, until finally our goal came into view. At the foot of the Fimmvörðuháls Pass was the Thorsmork Valley and the Krossá River. The backdrop to the valley was an imposing wall of rock in the form of the Katla and Eyjafjallajökull volcanoes, whose heights were entirely obscured by the blanket of cloud that formed a roof above the valley. This was only adding to the daunting feeling I had for tomorrow's climb. But for now, my mind was squarely set on getting to camp and having an ice-cold beer. And despite costing around £12 or $14, it was still one of the most hard-earned and best-tasting beers I've ever had. I'd thankfully not be getting my feet wet first thing as we set off the next day to begin our climb up and over the volcanoes, thanks to a bridge that had been placed over the Krossá River. Due to the fluctuating course of the river as it moves down the valley, it's not possible to set up permanent bridges, so bridges in this area are actually set on wheels, allowing them to be moved and replaced as required. Much like in Death Stranding, I found myself thankful to unknown strangers who had taken the time to make our journey that bit safer, drier, and more convenient. We began our climb along a bushy spur that jutted off from the volcano, and once again found ourselves greeted with strikingly beautiful views of mountains made up of an irregular jigsaw of greens and blacks. As we climbed, Thorsmork slowly receded behind us, and the roof of clouds began to press down from above. We took this climb slowly, stopping every few hundred meters to catch our breath. My friend Luke had woken up in the morning feeling a little worse for wear, so this slower pace was to make sure he didn't push himself too hard and risk worsening his condition. We had contemplated leaving the trail early at the start of the day, as Thorsmork would have been the only opportunity we would get to travel back to civilization until the very end of the journey. We had decided to press on, and while the climb was tough, we were certainly being rewarded for our perseverance. With the cloud line now within reach, we first had to climb a scree-covered ridge called Heljakamber, or in English, Hell's Ridge. To the left of us there was a deep gorge that was lined with plunging black cliff faces, and to the right the land sloped sharply downwards to the west, where the Markarfjota River could be seen again, branching and converging repeatedly as it continued on its course. In the final section of the ridge, I could see how Heljarkamba earned its name. A narrow path that was exposed on one side was the only route forward, and as someone who isn't especially fond of heights, I was certainly questioning how safe the flimsy chain with its loose anchoring was. So I put my camera away and gave the crossing my full attention. We stopped at the very edge of the cloud line to rest and take in the views before we would be surrounded by the mist. We had spent 4 days passing over and around the hills and mountains to the north of us, which were all now dwarfed by the slopes of the volcano we were sitting on. For the entire journey, we had been slowly making our way to this point. It represented the final hurdle and one of the biggest challenges we would overcome on the journey. And despite poring over maps, memorizing every route and contour line of the path ahead, I still had a sense of moving into something unknowable and mysterious. Because just as the mountain pass had loomed in the distance for 4 days, so too had the veil of cloud we were about to step into. The landscape changed dramatically as we entered the pass. The vivid greens now nowhere to be seen, replaced entirely with black and white. And despite the fog preventing us from seeing too far in any direction, I knew we were negotiating the routes between two of the youngest mountains in the world, Magni and Mothi, both named for Thor's sons in Norse mythology, which were formed after the eruption of Eyjafjallajökull in 2010. It was eerily quiet, the silence only broken by the crunch of the snow and ice underfoot. We moved slowly across the frozen fields bearing south, until we eventually met a pair of hikers who had gotten a bit turned around while looking for the peaks of Magni and Mothi in the mist. I checked my map and compass, pointing them in the right direction, and then we continued on our separate ways. Despite the rain that had now started to fall around us, we decided to take a short break at the edge of one of the snowfields, where I managed to steal a short nap. We were now roughly at the highest point of the pass, and from here would start our descent towards Skogar and the end of our journey.